Hi everyone, we're making a tunic today. It's got gathers, ruffles, bows, puffs. I don't know if it could be more princessy than that. So let me show you now a little bit all the details that I told you about. At the shoulder you have some ruffles here. Then at the sleeve we've got puff sleeve here with some more gathering. The sleeve also have some elastics to create even more volume along the way. So this is coming like here, this is coming like here, and it's elasticated, so it should be comfortable. Then if we move to the bust, we have the princess seams that are here. It's an alternative to darts. Speaking of darts, we have 4 darts in the back, 2 here at the waist sorta, and here at the back. On the front here, as a closure system, we have little bows. If I open, you can see that there's a white fabric inside. This is my lining. I took some poplin fabric for the lining. And the bust part is lined at the front and at the back. Finally, we have the skirt part. It's just gathered all along to create a bit more volume. So the fabric that I took here is a linen. It was gifted to me by a brand called Linen. It's a Lithuanian brand. They also do bedding and I think some garments, but you can also buy the fabric by the meter if you like their styles. It's okay for this project, but maybe I wouldn't entirely recommend it. The reason is that linen is heavy. The puffs here at the shoulders are collapsing because of the weight of the fabric, the weight of the sleeve. So if you were to take a fabric that's a bit lighter, such as a crisp poplin, I don't think it would happen as much. So yeah, that's the requirement. You must take a fabric that's not too free, not too light. You know, it's got to be a bit crispy, a bit stiff. So maybe you can take poplin. You can probably take taffeta. I don't know if you want to go in this direction, but it's surely gonna stress the princess look if you take something such as taffeta. And that's it. Let's go ahead and start the sewing tutorial. So here are the parts of the pattern. Here you have the bodice parts, here's the back, and here are the front parts of the bust with their princess seams. So only the bodice parts are lined in this white poplin fabric. In the middle we have the sleeves with some elastic tape, and then on the left we have the skirt parts. The skirt is divided between a back part that is cut on the fold, and then we have 2 front parts. Basically they're the same as the back, except that they're not cut on the fold, and they have extra seam allowance to make a hem so as to create the front opening of the blouse. And then we have little strips of fabric to create the ties for the bows later. And finally, you're gonna need a bit of interfacing to stick to the necklines, because since the necklines are curved, in other words they're cut in the bias, I'm afraid that they're gonna stretch out, so better stick some interfacing here. I'm gonna take the back parts of the bodice first and I'll sew the darts. You'll do this on both the shell fabric and the lining. So I take my shell fabric, which has some prints, and as you can see I have drawn the dots with a pencil. You can use a pencil or a pen. Maybe a better option is gonna be using a vanishing ink pen. And then I'm gonna pin and sew. This is what you get, and then I'm going to press down. Notice the direction in which I am ironing the dots. Alright, now I take the front parts of the bust. I'll take the lining first and I will lay these 2 parts right sides together. I pin and I sew so as to create the princess seam, and I do this on both the lining and the shell fabric. Then you want to take the bust parts and create some cuts in the seam allowance like this. Once it's done, you're going to press open the seam allowances of the princess seam. Right now I'm showing the process on the lining only, but you're going to have to do the same thing on the shell fabric. And once this is done, I stick interfacing along the neckline. You could have stuck it before, by the way. This interfacing strip is just a long piece that I have cut off interfacing that I bought by the meter. You don't have to buy the expensive strips of interfacing. You want to use light woven interfacing, non-stretchy. I just use the same type that I use to reinforce collars and cuffs of shirts. And you want the interfacing to be stuck where you will sew, so on the seam line, okay? Once this is done, this is what it looks like on the wrong side of the fabric. Then you're going to take the front and the back parts of the bodice in your lining, and you're going to connect these parts together, right sides together. You will sew these 2 layers on the side, shoulder, shoulder, side. This is the result after I have sewed and pressed the seam allowances open. Once the lining is done, you'll do the exact same steps with your shell fabric. So here, as you can see, I haven't yet cut nor pressed open the seam allowances, but I did it afterwards off camera. Okay, let's now concentrate on the strips of fabric that are going to be used to make the ties. So I took 1 strip, and what I do is fold, fold, and fold again, and then I sew here close to the edge. And this is what you get. So as I was filming the tutorial, I made 6 of these because originally I had put some of the bows all along the front opening, so even on the skirt part, but afterwards I realized that I didn't really like the result and I removed the ones on the skirt. So I recommend making only 3 of these strips instead of 6 as I'm doing right now on camera, but of course you can do whatever you want. And now I take each one of them and I cut them in half. Alright, so I have 1 strip here. I actually sewed the edge so as to seal the ends because I didn't want the fabric to unravel. I have my lining here and I'm showing you the markings that I made. I made 1 on top and 1 at the bottom, both 1 centimeter from the edge because this is my seam allowance, and then I made a mark in the middle. Also, you want to make the marks on the right side of the fabric. So I pin 1 strip against the top mark, a second one in the middle, and the last one at the bottom. And then I sew in the seam allowance. So this is what I get. Notice that the strips are still pinned to the fabric. I take my shell fabric and I pin it to the lining, right sides together, at the neckline and at the front opening. And this is the edge that I'm going to be sewing now. So this part at the corner is a bit sensitive. You want to check that you didn't sew the strips at the same time as the other layers. Okay, this is good. Also, if there is too much space between the strip and the corner, it's not going to look pretty, so you might want to adjust things right now if it's the case. Once you have checked that your seams are good, matching and so on, we'll be able to trim the seam allowances. The most important part are the corners and the curves. Then you turn inside out and you press down. After that, you can understitch. And this is what it should look like. I'm going to press down once again. I'll sew the 2 layers together at the waist and at the armholes as well. You can use a very long stitch length if you want. It's just really to fix the 2 layers together so they don't move. Now we can move on to the sleeve. So let me show you what we have here. This is the pattern piece. You want to make sure you transfer the important markings. First, transfer these lines here. You have 2 for the elastics. Here you have the interrogation marks because it's my draft, so don't pay attention to that. Obviously, you're not going to get this version of the pattern. Here are my lines on the fabric that I have traced. And then you have indications at the top where we have the ruffles. I have transferred this line here, which is here, It's 5.3 centimeters from the edge, and I have also marked the corners. I'm gonna cut here, and then along this edge I'll have a small hem. And here I cut as well. And so first I'll finish the edges of this ruffle strip. You don't have to, but for me it's gonna help make my hem, as I'm just gonna fold this overlocked edge twice to create it. Okay, this is what I have now, and I fold twice, and then I sew close to the edge all around. There you go. So now I cut my elastics. I'll give you a chart with the dimensions to cut, but please always check the dimensions on yourself before cutting, okay? Check that it's comfortable. I tried using these soft lingerie elastics because they're softer on the skin, and I thought maybe it would be more comfortable, but they weren't stretchy enough, so I don't recommend them. And for a previous toile, I used these sort of gummy elastics that are used to sew swimwear, and it was pretty good. To sew the elastics on the line, I hold both ends of the sleeve and I pull while I sew. I'm just using a regular straight stitch here. If you want your elastic to be sewed flatter to the fabric, you can use a zigzag stitch. And this is what we have now. I'll take the pattern again because we have the notch indicated for the shoulder seam and I forgot to transfer it. Now I close my sleeve, I fold it right sides together and I sew. Then I finish the edges. I'm also going to finish the edges at the wrist, and I will hem the wrists. I just fold twice the width of the overlock stitch and I sew. There you go. Okay, hem, check. Closing the sleeves, check. Elastic, check. Now we'll take care of the ruffles. So this is kind of the hardest part of this whole project, I'd say. You see the line I drew here? I will gather along this line. So you'll pick a straight stitch and the longest stitch length, and you'll make a first basting seam from here till the shoulder notch, and then the second one, and they're going to be like 3 millimeters apart, and then you do the same on the other side from the angle here till the shoulder notch. 2 basting seams without securing stitches. You could make just 2 long basting seams from one angle to the other, but in my experience it makes things a bit harder to spread the gatherings evenly. So my filming didn't work here, but I did 2 basting seams right there. I made a knot to seal one end, but it's not necessary. I didn't do it for the other sleeve. And just make sure that the threads are long before starting your seam, and long as well before cutting the fabric, so you can really grab them and pull. And now we're going to pin the sleeve to the armhole. It's a delicate process, I find. It's not super hard, but with all these threads and layers, it can feel a bit messy. You want to sew the sleeve right sides together to the bodice, and of course pay attention to the notches to know what's the front and what's the back. If you have a doubt, don't hesitate to go back to the paper pattern. I pin at the armpit and all the other notches that are available, and I also pin where the fabric isn't gathered. And then after that, we'll start pulling the basting seams to create as many gathers necessary for the sleeve dimensions to match that of the armhole, okay? So I've done the first part of the shoulder here. Took me some time because I wanted to spread the ruffles evenly. I'll do the other part now. The threads are a bit entangled. I was pulling and then it was blocked, so I had to do it again. I think the basting seam wasn't even and that some stitches were short, which prevented me from pulling the threads. So I removed these basting stitches and made new ones, and I made them red this time so you could see better. I'll let you observe how I pull and pin. And basically, once you're satisfied, you can sew all layers together, respecting 1 centimeter of seam allowance. Alright, these are what we have now. I have pulled out the basting threads, I finished the edges, and this is the result. I'll work on the other sleeve and get back to you. There you go. And at this point, I think it's looking quite cool. I guess you could almost wear it as such if you're bold enough. So we're moving on to the skirt. Here are our pieces. The back is cut on the fold. Then you have the front here not cut on the fold with extra seam allowance to create a hem at the front opening and in 2 parts. So I'm showing you now how I added my little strips to tie the skirt, but as I said, I ended up removing them, so don't pay too much attention unless you want to sew them as well. I pinned the strips, I sewed them, and now you want to finish the edges, so this is for everybody, regardless of whether you have those strips of fabric or not. I traced a line 2 centimeters from the edge, and I'll make a simple 1-fold hem here, and I sew. And only now did I notice that I cut my fabric upside down. Okay, I take the back of the skirt and I finish the edges on the sides. Once it's done, I lay my skirt parts right sides together to sew them at the sides. I press the seam allowances open. I'll go ahead and sew the bottom hem in the same way as I did the wrist, namely I finish the edges, then I fold twice, then I sew, and this is what I get. And now I'll gather my fabric, so we're gonna make basting seams again. I'm gonna make a basting seam here on the front, another one covering half the back, another one covering the other half of the back, and then the last one on the opposite front. And I make 2 of them, okay? 2 basting seams, of course. I pin the skirt to the bodice in the center back and at the front. And then I pull the threads and create gathers until the skirt width matches that of the bodice. And you pin. If it takes you a while, it's normal. When you're satisfied, so respecting 1 centimeter of seam allowance. There you go. I'll pull the gathering threads out. After that, I finish the edges. I insert the threads back in. Alright, the seams have been finished. Because this seam allowance here is sticking out, I'm going to top stitch it in place. And there you go, the project is finished. For the ties at the skirt, as I said, I ended up cutting them off, and then let's see the inside. Yeah, that's it, you guys. It's a fun one. I hope you liked it. If you saw it and share it on social, don't forget to tag me, Isa in Stitches, on Instagram, on TikTok as well, and use the hashtag DIY Josephine Blouse. Have a good one and see ya. Kiss.